Portugal is a beautiful and popular travel destination rich in art, architecture, food, wine, and landscapes, and it is one of Europe's premier birding destinations. Nestled in southwestern Europe, Portugal boasts an extraordinary diversity of habitats within a compact area. Portugal's strategic geographical location places it along a major migratory pathway, making it a birdwatcher's paradise. Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours is proud to offer two tours to southern Portugal that are timed for peak migration, one in the autumn and the other in the spring. Both tours visit the most important birding areas and landscapes while providing a bit of exposure to some of the country's vivid history, shaped over thousands of years by the rising and falling tides of some of the world's greatest civilizations. For the past decade, Vent has proudly operated tours to this incredible country, curated and led by João Jara, Portugal's leading birding guide. João's expertise and passion have truly put Portugal on the global birding map. But there's more to Portugal than just birding. It's a land of stunning landscapes, rich history, and vibrant culture. João will be our guide as we explore the birds, landscapes, and cultural highlights of southern Portugal. This program will also provide an in-depth look at our upcoming tours. Southern Portugal in autumn this fall and spring in southern Portugal debuting in April 2025. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the presentation. Now, let's turn it over to João.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Just starting to thank to Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours for inviting me to present this webinar, and just to say that it's a big pleasure for me to speak about my country. My presentation is basically divided into sections. The first speaking about the autumn, which is a wonderful time of the year to visit Portugal, as you are going to see, and spring, which is another fantastic time of the year to visit my country. So starting with the autumn trip, and we have, like Ben just mentioned, a tour scheduled for the 25th of September to October 7 this year. I would like to start just showing this picture of myself, which is just very quickly trying to reflect the fact that since a very early age, I was quite obsessed for animals, especially freshwater fish. All my home was full of aquariums, a little bit later than this picture, but anyway, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and of course birds. So I started birding a little bit later. I must admit that I started enjoying birds when they were in a cage. But anyway, with around 18, I started birding in the countryside, and I became completely obsessed with this passion. So, obviously, you know the map of Europe, but I would just like to show you this map. Where is Portugal with the arrow? As you can see, Portugal, as you well know, share the Iberian Peninsula with our big neighbor for European standards, Spain. And this slide reflects a phenomenon that is related with birding that is very important to increase the diversity of species, which you can guess. So look at the position of Portugal and the Iberian Peninsula between West, North Europe and Africa. And you can see that is clearly in a migration route. So this is the first point that I would like to point out, which is, I must say, important to both an autumn tour or a spring tour. Anyway, it's clear in this map that we are in a migration route, and this is very important because of the reasons that I just mentioned. The second map that I am showing you is a more detailed map of the Iberian Peninsula. And here we can also see something that is very important for birding. So as you can see, it's a peninsula, like the name indicates, so circled by water by all the sides except one, which is the link with France. But still, the link with France is characterized by a range of mountains, the Pyrenees. And the fact that is a peninsula, so circled by water by all the sides except one, and that side is also characterized by mountains, explain why we have in the Iberian Peninsula, including Portugal, of course, so many species of freshwater fish, amphibians, reptiles, some mammals, and even birds. Yes, even birds that can fly. We need to think that over the millions of years of evolution, some species basically restrict their range to the Iberian Peninsula. And we are going to speak about a little bit later on. The third factor that is related with birding that I would like to point out, which is not obvious in this map, of course, it's the fact that in Portugal, and I would say in Spain, but here focusing in Portugal, we still have an agriculture that is not as developed as other countries like France, Germany, England, and also that explains that we have very well preserved habitats, steppe areas for rock-loving birds, etc., that are really, really important because they explain why we have good numbers of birds precisely in our country. So 3 factors that are important as a resume: migration route, insulation, so the fact that it's a peninsula and the only link with the mainland Europe is characterized by high mountains, the Pyrenees, so explains the insulation, which explains endemic species, including birds, and finally, habitats well preserved in the Iberian Peninsula when compared with other regions of Europe that you probably know well. So Portugal is a very small country, even for European standards, not mentioning for US standards. Is a tiny country, roughly about 500 miles by 100 miles. And that's part of the strength of Portugal as a birdwatching destination, because we have a great concentration of habitats in a small territory. And this is especially true in the southern half, where is that square. Because in the southern half of the country, roughly the south of the river Tagus, which is the river that you can see crossing the middle of the country, which is the biggest river in the Iberian Peninsula. Roughly south of Tagus, you have the best wetlands near Lisbon and in the Algarve in the south. You have a wonderful area for rock-loving birds here near these valleys. So on the southeast area of the country, and finally the only steppe area of the country where we see bustards and other steppe birds. Also, it's very important that we have stands of olm, oak, and cork oak woodland all over the south of Portugal, and this is a very biodiverse habitat, again explaining the richness in terms of birds. Also, I would like also to mention this southwest tip of the country, the Cape St. Vincent and Sagres area, which are very important for migration, especially in fall, in autumn, as we are going to see next. So this southern, now focusing in the southern north of Portugal, is quite rich in preserves and natural reserves and natural parks. Actually, 24% of the Portuguese territory is protected um, uh, in terms of environment, and it is perfectly possible to visit from Lisbon all these wetlands around Lisbon. Then, in just 90 minutes, the steppe area of the Alentejo further south, staying several days in that area, and also visit the rock-loving areas of the valley that makes the border with Spain, which are spectacular for this kind of birds. And then visiting the Algarve, which is the southern coast, and returning to Lisbon in about 2.5 hours. So basically, this is my key message, and this is the main advantage of Portugal as a bird watching destination: no need of lengthy travel. This is, I think, very important. More time birding, less time in the car. And all these nature preserves guarantee a very good experience from the birding point of view, and of course also from the bird photography point of view. So imagine yourself arriving to Lisbon. I pick you up in the airport, and literally in about 20 minutes, we cross that bridge that you can see in the distance, the Vasco da Gama bridge. The airport is a little bit to the right of the picture, and we can see this kind of landscape: mud flats, salt marshes full of water birds, including, in this case, greater flamingos. And this is because basically Lisbon is almost surrounded by a nature reserve, the Tagus Estuary Nature Reserve. So you see on the left side of this map Lisbon in orange, and you see all the green area, which is a nature reserve that we typically, in our tours with the Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours, we visit for about 3 days. And this is a wonderful area to visit because it includes several different habitats, as you are going to see. So starting with wetland habitats, we have a kind of mosaic like you have in so many places in the US. But speaking now about the Tagus Estuary, of open water, mud flats, salt marshes, salt pans, rice fields, reed beds. So habitats associated with water and that are very rich for species like greater flamingos. This is a species that you can see all year round, but in autumn, it's probably the time of the year where we have higher concentrations. A very scarce heron in West Europe named squacco heron. We have always a few individuals in the Tagus Estuary to see all year round also, but again, autumn is one of the preferable times to see this species. And the range of shorebirds, we call waders in Europe, as you know, including Eurasian oyster catchers, pied avocets. The Tagus Estuary is the most important wetland in West Europe for wintering pied avocets, and these birds that come to winter typically come in late September, October. So, and they stay a few months. Species like bar-tailed godwit, another species that winter but come during autumn to the estuary. For the shorebird lovers, this is a picture that depicts a few species, as you can see. So curlew sandpiper, the biggest bird in the picture on the right lower side, several dunlins, including here and here and here, little stints, the two very small birds that you can see in the picture, and common ring plover on the upper left side of the picture. But all these species and many others of shorebirds are visible many almost year round, but especially in autumn. Ruff is another species to look for. It's a beautiful bird from the Palearctic. In terms of gulls, just to mention a couple of species, in this case, just one actually, Mediterranean gull, which is a species that winter mainly, a big population of Mediterranean gulls, more than 50,000 winter on the Portuguese coast. But again, they come in big numbers from July, late July onwards to winter in the Tagus estuary. But again, like I mentioned before, the Tagus estuary is not all about wetlands habitats. It also includes Corco woodland and other habitats like pasture. But speaking about the Corco woodland, which is a very, very rich from the biodiversity point of view kind of habitat, this is the area to see birds like black-winged kite that reminds very much your white-tailed kite. And Portugal is definitely the best country in Europe to see the species. The first endemic species of the Iberian Peninsula, the Iberian magpie, like the name indicates, Iberian magpie, once called azure winged magpie. So this is a bird that you can see all across southern Portugal, and including in the Tagus estuary. It's a very common bird. Spotless starlings. They are just starlings, but anyway, this is a species that have a very restricted range. Only Portugal, Spain, and some islands in the Mediterranean, like Corsica, and also North Africa. So it has a relatively restricted range, and it's a very common bird in Portugal. Also, birds associated to these woodlands are crested tit and many others. And imagine that we were exploring the Tagus estuary for 3 days, like I mentioned, and in just less than 90 minutes, following a very nice motorway, we reach completely different habitats, the steppe areas of the Alentejo. Here we are going to see completely different birds, great bustards, one of the heaviest flying birds on Earth. It's a spectacular bird, and we still have a population of about 1,000 individuals. Little bustards, which is a relatively similar bird, but way smaller, about the same size of a chicken, which is also an endangered species, but that we can see with some with how can I say with some confidence in Portugal. The second endemic species, the Spanish eagle. Obviously, I prefer to call it imperial eagle or Iberian imperial eagle, not Spanish eagle. But anyway, it's the name on the American lists, and I respect it. This is an immature bird. So in this area, we have about 25 pairs, and we know the places, and it's a species that once was very endangered and very difficult to see. Now it's, I would say, is basically guaranteed. Species also very charismatic, like red kite. They come to winter in good numbers from North Europe, and they arrive in the beginning of October. Little owl, which is an owl that we typically see in this area of the Alentejo, I would say every day. It's still a very common bird. The strange-looking Eurasian stone curlew or Eurasian tickney, which is a bird that we typically see also in these steppe areas. Calandro lark, one of the biggest larks on Earth, which is very interesting. But again, all this region where we are staying now for 4 nights, it's not only about steppe birds and steppe habitat. We also have an area that we call that is protected, of course, is the Guadiana Valley Natural Park, which is very rich of a Mediterranean shrub, which again is quite important from the biodiversity point of view. It's also very rich in olm oak, which is an oak typically of southeast Portugal. And we stay those 4 nights in a town called Mértola, which is an absolutely spectacular town. From your balconies, you can see birds like, depending on the season, of course, but Craig Martin, red-rumped swallow, many times vultures, many times large eagles. Is really blue rock thrush, rock bunting. Is really a precious town, and every time it's a very old town. Every time they repair a pipe, basically they find either Phoenician, Roman, or Moorish remains. You can see the castle, the church that is a mix of church and mosque. It's really a fantastic place to stay. And it's a wonderful base because we can access both the steppe area and the area of the Guadiana Valley. Actually, Mértola is in the Guadiana Valley, is inside the park. In this kind of more wooded area and more hilly area, we are going to see different birds, including red-legged partridge. The third Iberian species, Iberian green woodpecker, which is a very interesting woodpecker that is restricted, as I said, to Portugal and Spain. We typically see it in this place. Iberian grey shrike, despite the name, is not a complete endemic species of the Iberian Peninsula because there is a small population in southern France. Anyway, it's a bird that the best region of the world to see. It's clearly southern Portugal and, I must say, southern Spain. Again, in this Guadiana Valley, there are other kinds of habitats. These crags and hills are very important to see different kinds of birds, different species of birds, sorry. And this is a place called Pulo that we typically visit, which is fascinating from the geological point of view. And typically in this kind of habitat, we see birds like Eurasian griffon, a huge vulture that has a wingspan of about 8 feet. This is the typical view of the birds in the Guadiana Valley. The cinereous vulture, black cinereous vulture, which is even bigger than griffon vulture, about the same size of your California condor. It's a majestic bird that is also very range restricted. It's basically Portugal, Spain, a few places in North Africa, Greece, Turkey. So it's a quite endangered species. Bonelli's eagle, a very charismatic eagle with a long tail, as you can see. And I just refer this because it's a very agile eagle that can hunt birds on the wing, which is quite spectacular to see. And we have here quite a good population of Bonelli's eagles in this area of the Guadiana Valley. Eurasian eagle owl. This is another charismatic species, one of the biggest owls in the world, even bigger than your horned owl, which we normally see because we know a couple of places where is generally speaking, I wouldn't say guaranteed, but it's very likely that we get good views of the Eurasian eagle owls. Beautiful martins like the Eurasian Craig Martin, a very rare bird in Europe, only Portugal and Spain, white-rumped swift. It's a migratory bird that winters in South Africa and migrate north. Typically, they nest in North Africa, Central and North Africa, but a few pairs reach Portugal and Spain. They cross the Mediterranean to reach the Iberian Peninsula. And late September, beginning of October is a great time to see white-rumped swift because the chicks are already flying, of course, and they are still around before they migrate again south, more around 20th of October. Other birds to look out in this area include blue rock thrush, and after staying those 4 days, 4 nights in Mertula, visiting the steppe, the rock-loving, the Olmoke woodlands areas, in just 50 minutes we reach the Atlantic in the south. We reach Algarve, which is characterized by different habitats, including salt pans, where we are going to see some gulls that we don't have near Lisbon, like Godwin's gulls, like slender-billed gulls, very beautiful gulls. Also, blue trout in this time of the year is arriving from North Europe to winter in the Iberian Peninsula. Typically, they winter in salt marshes. The Algarve is also very rich in freshwater lakes, where we are going to see also charismatic species like the western swampan, the common kingfisher. We only have in Europe, as you know, one kingfisher. It's tiny. It's very small compared with your belted, etc. Kingfishers. But anyway, it's as you can see, it's a precious bird with an electric blue that is really, really beautiful. Of course, we couldn't miss the famous Eurasian hoopoe. This is probably the species that, in my experience, American birders enjoy most, if I would make a rank. And this is a bird that we typically see every day in an autumn tour, and I must say, in this case, in a spring tour too. European sarin, which is also a very common bird, typically of Southern Europe. And in the Algarve, we visit in the autumn tour a very, very special place that is called Cape St. Vincent, the Sagres Peninsula, that I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, because this is a spectacular place to be in the beginning of October, precisely, because many soaring birds, just to say that this is a key place for migration. Why? Because of seabirds migrating typically from north to south during fall, but also soaring birds, raptors and storks that are coming from the north. You imagine them coming from those cliffs, but after flying through hundreds of miles, and they reach this peninsula that you are seeing, which is bigger than in this picture, and they realize that they cannot make it to Africa. So I'm speaking about soaring birds that winter in Africa, because the distance from this cape to Africa is about 250 miles. And as you know, all these soaring birds are adapted to fly, basically soaring and taking the advantage of thermals and gliding, and then going up again with another thermal and gliding. And that's how they evolve. But the question is that above the sea, almost there are no thermals. So they cannot make it to Africa. So this is a great opportunity, because they got, if I might say, kind of stuck in this peninsula, sometimes for 1-2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. And we can have here hundreds of raptors until the wind is favorable for them to go east and to cross in Gibraltar, already in Spain. So this is really a great place for migration. And some birds that we typically see in the beginning of October include Egyptian vulture. So all species that winter in Africa, booted eagle, short-toed snake eagle, and I'm just giving some examples. In terms of seabirds, Cory's shearwater, great shearwater, Balearic shearwater, which is a very interesting species that is endangered and has a very restricted range. Basically, they breed, they nest in the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean, but they do what we call molt migration to the Biscay, so to the north of Spain, meaning that they cross our coast, heading north and south. And in this time of the year, they typically go. Actually, they go north, and it's a spectacular bird to see. Wilson storm petrel. So I'm just mentioning some examples of species that you typically see in Sagres in a in a in a autumn day, which is really interesting. So obviously we organize a pelagic trip, but for the people that do not like pelagic trips, or if the sea is not that calm, it's perfectly possible to see some of these species from the coast, of course. And of course, the raptors, for the raptors, we stay in the coast. Sagres is also a great place from the cultural point of view, because Infante Dom Henrique, one of the most famous navigators from Portugal, organized his school there some centuries ago, and it's really a special place to be. So after visiting all these areas of the Algarve, basically in 2.5 hours we return to Lisbon. So again, no need of lengthy travel. That's our main advantage, which obviously is as important for an autumn trip or for a spring tour. And this is and that's what I'm going to now to mention. Some aspects that are more important for a spring tour. So as I mentioned before, we have a tour scheduled for April 22 to May 4, which is exactly the peak of migration. It's a great time to see birds singing, to see the birds in full breeding plumage. Basically, in this time of the year, all the African migrants arrived already, so it's really a special time, to come. Portugal has a big population of white storks, about 26,000 pairs. It's one of the countries in the world with more storks. This is a bird that about 1/3 still come from Africa. The others stay for winter. Anyway, I decided to use this slide as you know, is a symbol of spring and fertility. But in the Tagus estuary, besides many white storks, we also see charismatic summer migrants coming from Africa, like purple heron, a very handsome duck that breeds in the Tagus estuary. So we typically see it in spring, the red-crested pochard. And this is the time of the year when you see the shorebirds in full breeding plumage. This is a flock of black-tailed godwits. The Tagus estuary is a very important region for passage migrant black-tailed godwits heading to North Europe and to Iceland. Birds like red knot, which is the same species you have in the US, but from this side of the pond. A very interesting shorebird that is completely adapted to hunt on the wing. It seems like a gigantic swallow. Is called collared pratincoll. They typically arrive on the first week of April. Is a very pretty bird that come to nest in the Iberian Peninsula. The western yellow wagtail, we have the Iberian race, which is, as you can see, a very, very colorful bird. Not only in the Tagus estuary, but all over Lisbon, for instance. You can hear the the spectacular screams of pallid swift. They are also very common here where I live in Lisbon. We don't listen to them now because I have the windows closed, of course. And this is spring, a very nice time for seeing a suite of warblers in the Tagus estuary, including Sardinian warbler, Dartford warbler, spectacled warbler, melodious warbler, and I'm just giving some examples. There are more, of course. A breeding endemic species, Iberian chiefchaff. So I cannot say that is a real endemic because this species winter in Africa. But anyway, when they migrate, they only basically they only breed nest in the Iberian Peninsula. So this is a breeding endemic, we call. Another most sought after species is the European bee-eater, and we can tell why. Beautiful colors, is a spectacular bird that is quite common in the Tagus estuary in April and May. One exotic species that is breeding in that time of the year that is very pretty is the black-headed weaver. So this is not a species originally from Portugal. It was introduced basically from escapes from the cage, from the pet area. But anyway, they are quite common in this area and they are very beautiful, as you can see here, weaving the nest. And after exploring again for 3 days that preserve, the Tagus Estuary Nature Reserve, very close to Lisbon, as you remember. In just, again, less than 90 minutes, you reach, again, the steppe area of the Alentejo. But of course, I must say that in spring, there are some advantages, and you can see one of them. It's beautiful. All the flowers, the fields, it's a very special time of the year to visit this area. And not only because of the flowers, of course, but because, for instance, great bustards are displaying. This is a group of males kind of preparing to display. Again, one of the heaviest flying birds on Earth. They can reach 16 kilos, which is a lot. The little bustards that you saw picture some minutes ago, now in breeding plumage. This is a male with a black and white and gray neck, also displaying, which is quite a spectacular display. Very charismatic species like the black-bellied sandgrouse. They are very vocal, and they are typically easily seen in this steppe area of the Alentejo. Species like the European roller that are just coming from Africa, and they stay in Portugal between beginning of April and, let's say, August. Sometimes there is 1 or 2 birds that lingered in Portugal until late September, October. But of course, to see these birds, I must say spring is way better compared with autumn. The cinereous vulture that actually I already show a picture, but in this time of the year they are quite easy to see. Another migrant species that winters in Africa called Montagu's harrier, which is a very endangered species and is a very special and pretty bird, typically of these steppe grasslands of the Alentejo. Lesser kestrel, a beautiful falcon, also associated with these steppe habitats of the Alentejo. As I said before, the Alentejo is not only about steppe areas. There are areas of all oak, but again, you can see the flowers. And this is the kind of habitat where you are going to find other migratory birds that arrive from Africa a couple of weeks before your visit, including woodchat shrike, great spotted cuckoo. Actually, this is a early migrant, but anyway, They are present in May, in April and May in Portugal. A very charismatic bird, which is the black stork, the golden oriole. We also have very nice orioles, as you can see. A very handsome bird, black-eared wheatear, more associated with the rocky areas. Rock bunting, also, as the name indicates, associated with the rocky areas, those crags and escarpments that I mentioned before near the river valley. So after staying in this Alentejo area, in that town called Mértola that I show a picture some minutes ago, for about 4 days, 4 nights, we start to do our journey of about, like I said before, 15 minutes, sorry, and we reach the the Algarve. In the Algarve, which is the southern tip of Portugal, there are some birds that nest that we don't have as a nesting species in the Tagus estuary, including the pied avocet. So it's also lovely to see these kind of scenes. It's a great area to see birds like the little bittern. And at night, and I could mention many other species, of course, but it's a typical sighting when we came from dinner to see one or two barn owls. So, besides all these birds, and this is obviously valid both for autumn or spring, Portugal is of course I'm Portuguese, but I believe is a great destination because besides all those birds, other animals that I didn't mention, some mammals, amphibians, reptiles, butterflies, of course, dragonflies. We have the history, lovely cities and towns. This is the main square of Lisbon, the Praça do Comércio, overlooking the river, which actually is on the right side of will be on the right side of the picture, and the castle on top, full of history. It's a very cosmopolitan city, which basically we visit for one day, and typically is, I would say, one of the highlights of the visit because there are so many things to see that it's really worthwhile to invest at least one day seeing the city. The city and several of his monuments. This is probably the most charismatic one. The Jeronyms Monastery was built in 1500 by our King Dom Manuel I. It's a very spectacular, imposing monument to celebrate the discoveries. And there are other motives of interest besides to visit Lisbon. For instance, in Mértola, we spend about 2 hours visiting the archaeological remains. And this is just a picture showing some of the Roman and Moorish archaeological remains, which are really interesting. And we are guided by an historian guide, like in Lisbon, by the way. So, as a resume and to finish my presentation, Portugal is in a migratory route. So, like it was mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, yes, autumn and spring are very interesting times to come because the birds are passing. And anyway, it's always an area with a very high diversity of birds, because in spring you have the birds coming from Africa, and in autumn you have the birds coming from northwest Europe, well, some from Iceland and even some from Greenland, like our northern wheatear. So besides the fact that is in a migration route, just to remind you that the fact that the Iberian Peninsula is a peninsula and the link with mainland Europe, in this case France, is characterized by high mountains, the Pyrenees, explain an insulation phenomenon that explain why we have several endemic species of birds and many other animals. And again, to remind you that fortunately, in a way, we still have quite unspoiled habitats in Portugal, especially in the southern half, which is the area where we have our tours, both in autumn and in spring. Again, because the main advantage is no need of lengthy travel. So it's perfectly possible to navigate to visit these preserves, being centered basically near Lisbon, in Alcochete, outside Lisbon, but in the Tagus estuary for 3 nights, being in the middle of the way in Mértola for for 4 nights, and finally in Tavira in the Algarve for another 3 nights and then return. This is a very good, I believe, tour, because really it's possible to see a big diversity of habitats and consequently of birds without the need of lengthy travel. This is very important, we believe. So just to finalize my presentation, basically I just said this, but anyway, located in a very special bioregion within the continent, the Iberian Peninsula. Why southern Portugal? A fantastic diversity of habitats and birds. I just mentioned that. So to reflect that in a relaxed pace, we typically see in these tours about 180 species. A few endemic species, which is quite unique for European standards. So I mentioned to you 3 endemic species, and there are several near endemic and 1 breeding endemic at least. And of course, the birds is probably the most important thing, but it's also important the beautiful countryside, the landscapes, the fact that we have an excellent infrastructure, fascinating history, lovely food, great wine, and the guaranteed welcome, of course. This is also an important fact that I believe I should mention. There is an index, an entity that tried to measure the odds of having a problem in a country, and Portugal is always on the first 10. On the last Global Peace Index of 2023, we were number 7, just after countries like New Zealand, Iceland, Austria, and others, and that reflects also something very important, which is the peace of mind of going to a country that is peaceful. Of course, if you come, and I hope you come, there are some field guides that you need to bring. If you don't bring, we have them anyway. The Birds of Europe. Now it's actually is the 3rd edition, and of course there are field guides for mammals, butterflies, and reptiles and amphibians. There are many books related, of course, somehow with Portugal, starting with the discoveries, the conquerors. We had the Nobel Prize of the literature, José Saramago. Was Portuguese. So there are, I think, fascinating other facts besides the birds to think when we speak about Portugal. And finally, as Ben already mentioned, we have 2 tours scheduled, one in autumn between the 25th of September to 7th of October, and the spring tour. Again, both are exactly in the very well scheduled, because they are in the very best time to come, if you opt for autumn or if you opt for spring. So the spring is between the 22nd of April and the 4th of May, and you have below the contacts if you need more information. And of course, I'm also very keen to try to answer to any doubt or question you may have. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm obviously completely open to any question you may have.
Hey, great. Thanks, João, for that presentation. And now we'll turn on our webcam and see what questions we have from the audience. And I do want to apologize to the audience for the technical issues we were having with the microphone. It seems that it has been resolved. There was a problem with communicating between our servers from the United States and Lisbon. There's a question here from Leslie. Leslie wonders if the fall tour will be offered in 2025. And we don't have that on the books yet. Right now, we only have Southern Portugal in spring for 2025, and we have Southern Portugal in autumn in this September. So what we can do, Leslie, is put you on a list to be notified if that is published for 2025. And I also wanted to mention that the handouts are available for the detailed itineraries for both of these tours. Feel free to download those and read them at your leisure as you're planning your next trip for Portugal. So, João, will you tell us again the highlights between the spring tour and the fall tour, and how would somebody decide which one to go on if they can't go on both? Because that's really the answer. They should go on both tours.
I agree. Well, you know, the autumn trip, actually, it's a tour where we typically see even more species than in spring, because there is an interesting phenomenon, which is the fact that many passerines, when they come in spring from Africa, migrating to North Europe, they tend to have a more easterly route, and when they come down in autumn from North Europe to Africa, they tend to come in a more westerly route. Autumn also have slightly more, even more diversity, and another advantage is for the people that like seabirds, it's the time to come. This being said, spring is spring, you know. The birds are singing, are in the breeding plumage, are displaying, and some of the most charismatic birds that migrate from Africa can basically only seen in a spring tour. I mean, just for as an example, European bee-eater, as I said before, European roller, great spotted cuckoo, so they will not be present, except maybe roller, but they will not be present in a fall tour. So it's there are advantages for both time of the year to come, and fortunately we have many people that came in autumn and then decides to come in spring, because the range of species, some are common, of course, between spring and autumn, but many are not. So it's really, I think it's really two wonderful tours.
Good. Nancy has a question. How long is a birding day? Is there night birding to see nightjars?
Typically, starting with the end of your question, typically in a spring tour, when we go for dinner in the Algarve, we know a very good place for redneck nightjar, and we typically try to see them. Redneck nightjar is a late migrant. They arrive on the last week of April, but the tour is scheduled for the last days of April and the first days of May, so they will be present, yes. So the answer is yes. We typically do a couple of outings after dinner, especially in the Algarve, to try to see some nocturnal birds. So the other question, sorry, I start with the end and then.
How long is a birding day?
Oh, yes, it's a very important question, actually. Um, well, it's not. I also organize trips into tropical areas, etc. So we don't need to wake at 4:30 in the morning in Portugal. Typically, we start our day around 7:30, 7:30, breakfast at 7, and we return to the hotel around 5:30, 6 p.m. maximum. Because, in Portugal it's difficult to have dinner before 7:30. So our concern is always to give to the guests at least 1 hour, ideally 1.5 hours to rest before we go for dinner. But anyway, I think it's important to refer that you remember the advantage that I'm keep mentioning, that small is beautiful. We are, the concentration of different habitats. What I want to say is the following: both in the Tagus estuary, both in Mértola, and both in Tavira. So this is where we are going to stay for the night. It's perfectly possible, and we do that all the time, to imagine that someone is tired on that morning and prefer to catch up the group only at lunchtime. It's perfectly possible in the majority of the days. Obviously, it's not possible on the days that we travel, but on the majority of the days, it's perfectly possible to organize something like that and come to pick the person at lunchtime, or the opposite, staying at lunch, after lunch, for resting. That's perfectly possible because, again, we are typically birding in a relatively restricted range around these towns where we are staying.
Good. Well, thank you. It looks like that's all of our questions for this presentation. But if you think of something afterwards, feel free to email me, ben@ventbird.com, or sharon@ventbird.com, the tour operations manager, for details about registration. We want to thank João for joining us today.
Thank you. It is me. Thank you for listening to my presentation. It's really a pleasure to speak about my country and the birds of my country.
And thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on a vent tour in the near future. Bye, everybody.
Bye.